I am going to call to order. If you could start the recording. Oh, has it already started?
Yes.
Right. It's 1 o'clock, so I'm going to call to order meeting of the Assembly Public Safety Committee, a joint meeting with the Public Safety Advisory Commission. It is February 18th at 1 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. And we will start with a roll call. Desiree, would you do a roll call for the Assembly, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Mr. Constant and Ms. Zolotel both have a previous meeting, so neither of them will be here today, or a meeting in conflict.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
France? Mr. Presberdia?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Ms. Quinn Davidson? Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Zolotel, you said, is at a meeting. Okay, thank you. You have quorum.
Great, thanks. Terrence, would you call roll for the commission?
Yes, commissioners. First is Commissioner Apoc.
Here.
Commissioner Fleener. There it is. I see Commissioner Fleener. Commissioner Edenshaw.
Here.
Commissioner Budd. Commissioner Montrenock. Commissioner Wygren. Commissioner Price.
Here.
And Commissioner Kloster.
Here.
And we do have quorum.
Thanks. Well, welcome everyone. In a moment, I'll introduce the new chair of the commission, Jeremy Price, and I give him a chance to share any opening comments and thoughts. But I just wanted to a few just housekeeping items for members of the assembly and commissioners. We typically in these meetings use the chat as a way to get into queue. So if you have a question or want to make a comment, that's a really good way to just post in there, and both Jeremy and I will keep an eye on that. And so if you want to get in, just post in there. And I'll in a moment review sort of the purpose of our meeting and kind of our plan for today. But before I do that, I wanted to give Commissioner Price an opportunity to sort of introduce himself and just share any opening thoughts before we begin. Jeremy.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, my name is Jeremy Price. I'm the new chair. Kendra's vice chair, outgoing chair. There's a lot of us that are new on PSAC, and we're looking forward to serving and learning more about the issues that matter to folks. And I know we've got a lot to learn. Me especially. I've only been on the commission for a few months, or I'm sorry, for a few weeks, really. We look forward to these. Hopefully we'll have more of these types of joint meetings with you all. These are some important issues that we're ready to engage in. So thanks again for the opportunity. Look forward to a good meeting here today.
Thank you, Jeremy. And just a few comments about process and purpose. One thing to just make sure those in the public are aware of is that the purpose of this meeting is really a joint meeting between these two bodies, and we're going to have a series of presentations where we'll hear from the Department of Law, we'll hear from APD, and we'll have discussion among the members. And then once that is finished, then there'll be an opportunity to have public testimony, and so the public can come forward and have time to be able to share your own thoughts. There has been quite a bit of interest, and I just wanted to clarify that this meeting is very different than, for instance, a community conversation. And there is folks here that are working on planning some community conversations that we can have that will give a lot more access and a lot more time for the community to engage in these conversations. So for those of you that had hoped that this is the time for that, it really is not, but we are planning on making sure that there's more opportunity for the community to weigh in on these issues and other issues related to public safety. But we will have plenty of time, I think, at the end for the public to speak and to share. So I just want to make sure that that was clear. If you could put up the agenda, please, Desiree. I'll just walk through that real quick, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to start, and there is a series of documents that are on the Public Safety Committee website, and so for those of you who want access to those documents, there's quite a few up there, including this agenda. So I'll start today by giving a little bit of a timeline, a little bit of information about where we've been in terms of the policy development, and some information about how the community thus far has been engaged. Then I'll hand it off to the Department of Law, where they will talk a little bit about the process of the policy development and review the meetings they've had, those kinds of things, and discuss some of the legal justifications and limitations that went into developing this policy. And then the Anchorage Police Department will present sort of unpacking the policy. What does this look like in practice? And then talk about some of the next steps and a timeline for where they see this going, and when we can expect to see the policy finalized and potentially start to see body cameras out on the street. So with that, Desiree, I told you that I wasn't going to need it, but I actually think it would be helpful if you could put the overview document up, and I'll use that to sort of walk through the background, if you could do that for me. Thank you very much. Oops, I think this is not the right one, though. This is an old version of it.
Sorry, can you tell me the title of the document?
Yeah, it should be on the website, and it's the top document. Let's see here. I just had it a minute ago. Yeah, I have it if you want. How do I share my screen? Let's see here. I've actually never shared a screen before.
I just changed you to presenter, so if you click on the box that has a little arrow in it.
Yep, I see it. Okay, let me share my screen, and I'll use that to go over it. My computer is really slow. I might need to have you do it. So it's the top document on the committee website. Yep, that's it. If you could make it a little bit bigger, that would be great. Okay, so let's scroll down a little bit, and we'll use the timeline here. The purpose of this meeting is for us to start with kind of where we've been. So between 2014 and 2017, the Anchorage Police have been using dashboard cameras, and body cameras in the United States and across the country have become over the years more of a standard practice. And so this begins to talk about a little bit. Really, in 2020, there was conversation beginning around body-worn cameras and whether those should be brought to our city. If you could scroll up a little bit, let's scroll down a little bit. So in June 9, APD announced that they would pursue body cameras and asked the Assembly for funding. And then January of 2021, Assembly put a special levy for $1.8 million on the April ballot and allocated an additional $250,000 for cameras. In February, APD provided the draft policy accompanying a PowerPoint to the PSAC. APD announced intentions to have officers wearing the cameras by the end of that year. April 6th, municipality voters approved Prop 4, 53.81%. May 7th, APD announced the planning process for body-worn cameras with an emphasis on community's thoughts, concerns, and expectations. June 4th, APD released a draft policy for body cams on the APD website and reiterated their intention to have officers wearing the camera by the end of the year. June 16, APD held listening session for the public and got input on the draft policy. July 1st is when Bronson administration took office, and then July 7th, the PSAC public meeting. We had several PSAC meetings on July, August, and August again, where body cameras were discussed. And then October 6th, Municipal Manager Domosky announced to the Public Safety Committee that the legal department had expressed some concerns about the original draft policy and would be issuing a new policy. APD on October 7th issued a revised draft policy with 1 month to submit comments from the public. So then we went for a full month of public comments, which are available on our website, where you can go and look at those. On February 2nd, APD released edits to the revised draft based on the public comments. And then today we are having a Public Safety Committee joint meeting with the Commission, where we will be discussing it. And I don't think we need to go through the rest of it. Folks can read that by themselves. And so I would just say a few additional things. One is that I mentioned this before. There were conversations between the Commission and Kendra and myself and members of the ACLU and others to look at planning more conversations with the community around policies as well as policing in general. And so those dates and times will be planned soon. And with that, I think I'll stop and hand it over. If there are any questions for me, I don't see them. Okay, we're going to hand it over to next, I believe, the Department of Law, and they're going to spend some time reviewing sort of the legal perspective around this policy and also the work that they've done to get to where we are now. Patrick and Blair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So, Assemblymember Perez-Rudia, thank you for that summary, because it makes it easier for us to kind of explain what we've done during this time. So the legal department, knowing that this was coming, started researching the law around body-worn cameras and privacy and all those things, certainly by the beginning of 2021. But because there was no finalized policy, we didn't start reviewing APD's policy until sometime between August and September of 2021, because that's when the first public draft had been released, as you noted. And so, and public comments had been taken, and we had some idea of what the final policy might look like. So the Department of Law started reviewing in August of 2021. We then provided comments to APD, and then we engaged in a series of, at least 3 or 4 meetings. I mean, we've probably spent a good 10 hours together in a group between the legal department and APD, discussing the draft policy, discussing the public comments, discussing all of those things, debating our concerns, debating how the policy should be drafted, what the wording should be. And in the course of those conversations, the legal department did raise concerns about some of the provisions for the automatic release of video, specifically officer-involved shootings, because of the fact that Alaska has the most stringent privacy laws in the United States, that we're more than happy to comply with the law and release what we're legally allowed to release, but that we did not feel like we could commit to an automatic release of specific types of recordings. And so I know that that's been one of the big topics of conversation among these two committees. And what I can say is that we advised APD that, you know, we can only release recordings within the confines of the law. And there's a lot of concerns that go into releasing a recording. A lot of times there's people in the recordings, the person who has been shot has privacy interests. If an officer is shot, they have privacy interests. There could be other people in the videos that have privacy interests, juveniles, victims, things like that. And so committing to some sort of automatic release would be challenging, and we think is probably not consistent with the law in Alaska. And so we started, we engaged in that process with APD. We met with them several times, and I think that based on those interactions, you see the policy that was released in October of 2021. Then after that was released, there was the new period for public comment that went until November 6th. We then engaged in further conversations with APD after reviewing those comments to see what changes we could make, what the public comments were. So APD and the legal department again went through all those comments. And I understand, I mean, I think we all understand that there are aspects of the policy that the public might like to see different. There's certainly aspects that APD would like to see different. This was a hard fought policy with a lot of compromise to get to where we are. And we took all of the public comments very seriously when we reviewed them. And so I think that's kind of where we are on the whole thing. We're more than happy to answer any questions, but that is kind of how we got to where we are from the legal department's point of view.
Thank you, Blair. I do have a question in the queue from Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment or question might be a little stale now, but looking at that timeline that we had, just one of the bullets mentions the April 6, 2021 approval of Prop 4, and the way it reads, maybe I'm misunderstanding, a property tax increase to pay for the cameras and other technology at APD by 53.81%. And I think that maybe can be misunderstood as a huge property tax increase where it's not actually. So I just hope that maybe we get clarification on that from somebody, but I think that's a misprint or I'm reading it wrong.
Thank you, Dean. That's a really good catch. I believe that the intention of that is the percentage of the vote and not a percentage of tax increase. And so we need to make a change to that document. So thanks for catching that. Okay. And so I am looking at the queue. Thank you, Blair, for your presentation. Patrick, anything you'd like to add before we move into questions?
I appreciated Assemblymember Perez Verdia. I think it's probably best to go right into a question and answer session.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm looking to members of both the commission and the Public Safety Committee for questions, and I don't see any in the queue at this time. Just as a reminder, especially to the commissioners, if you post in the chat and just put something in there like I got a question, something, then I'll make sure you get in. So it looks like we're good. We're good for now. Thank you very much to you both. We're going to hand it over to Chief Curl and DC Case for a presentation from them.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Chief Mike Curl, if you don't know me. There's been some questions about the policy. It seems it's written in police jargon, and there's some misunderstandings of what it says, or actually a lack of understanding. So before I go into the timeline of where we're going, I'm going to have my Deputy Chief Sean Case do a presentation to explain the current policy in more layman's terms and how we anticipate it going forward. Sean, take it away.
All right, let me share screen here. All right, so I'm gonna, I didn't put every line in the policy in this presentation. I think I would have put you all to sleep. So I just want to hit the highlights and particularly some of those areas that everybody's interested in. Keep in mind that what you're seeing here in this PowerPoint, the training that the officers will get prior to using body worn cameras is going to be many times longer than this to include hands-on training with the equipment, scenario training so that they can get used to operating the equipment in as close to a real world scenario as possible. And then obviously clearly covering the entire policy with our staff and, allowing a long period of question and answer. So you're going to get to see kind of a very brief version of what we'll probably use with our own officers. So first, the objectives of the policy. There are 6 listed in the policy. So if you are familiar or you're looking at the policy, you'll see I kind of took out the 3 highlights. When I refer to documentation, that covers not only capturing what the officer are doing, but it's going to allow us to use that in court proceedings and certain administrative proceedings. Really is going to help us do our job all the way around better because we just have that documentation of both audio and video. Impartial measures, and what we're referring to there is that, the camera doesn't have feelings. It just captures what's in front of it. We also have to understand that there's some limitations with the camera. What the camera sees is not necessarily what the officer or any other person in the video is actually seeing. So it's going to capture a much wider angle than what the officer is even able to view and observe. But it is impartial in terms of it's not a human being capturing the information. And then the third objective really is the public trust piece to it. We have contact with members of the public that are going to feel better that an officer is wearing a body worn camera. And so that's encapsulated in the objectives as to why we're incorporating body worn cameras. Big question is, when's this camera going to be on and off? And from a very simplistic standpoint, it's when you have a police encounter with the public. And we've got some exceptions that are listed. And those exceptions are when it's unsafe, impossible, or impractical to do so. And I'll get into kind of some of those impractical portions here in a little bit. I know there's been some public comment over the word impossible and impractical. When I think about the word impractical and we teach to our employees, we kind of define that as is this a wise choice to do? And so we'll give some policy language for our officers kind of to make that decision. So just to kind of get an idea, what we're talking about here is traffic stops. Anytime we make an arrest, the body worn camera is going to be functional and operating. Crime scenes, crime investigations, and the collection of evidence during that process to include search warrants. Anytime there's a tactical operation or a high-risk operation, we'll be utilizing cameras. And then really anytime we have just a contact with the public that is police related. So, if somebody crosses the street and asks an officer downtown where the best place to eat downtown is, we're probably not going to operate the camera. However, if somebody comes running across the street yelling something that we don't understand or can't make out, we're probably going to turn on our camera because we just don't know the nature of that contact. So that's kind of an overview. There's several things that we specifically list in the policy just as examples for our officers as to when they're going to be operating the camera. But in a very simplistic term, when we have contact with the public, the camera is going to be on if it's at all police related. We got some restrictions. And you notice that we use the word shall when we talked about when we were going to turn the camera on. So we're pretty, in police language, that means the camera is going to be operating. And then when we get to the restrictions, we start using some softer language, and that kind of goes back to that impractical word at the beginning. Here we use the word may, and specifically related to sexual assault investigations. We, in the field, the patrol officers, are very cautious about the interviews and contacts they have with victims of sexual assault. We try to minimize the trauma that the victim has already had. And so in many, many cases, putting sexual assault victims on a camera is not in the best interest of their recovery as well as the case. And at a later time in the investigation in a confined and controlled environment, that interview with that victim is audio and video recorded. So it's done in a better location that's designed to minimize increasing trauma. So we use the word may. We have communication that we're involved in on a regular basis. If we pick up the phone and call a prosecutor for advice on a case, or we're discussing some elements of the case with another officer, another government employee, we will be allowed to pause the recording while those conversations take place. We also want to minimize the recording of people who are naked. Now, I'd love in a perfect world not to capture that stuff on body-worn cameras, but unfortunately, we get involved in situations where there are times we have contact with those that are naked that I think is beneficial for that to be recorded, both for the safety of the officer and the public, and in some cases, the tactical situation as well. So we do want our officers to be very, very, yes, ma'am, yes.
Oh, sorry. Can I just interrupt you just a second? I have a question from Mr. Rivera. Mr.
Absolutely.
Rivera, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I have just a comment and the question for you, Mr. Chair, then a question for Mr. Case. So first is just I am very happy that we are finally at this point, and I'm really appreciative of the Public Safety Committee and the Public Safety Advisory Commission for getting us here. As the co-chairs know, I've been pushing for us to get to this point for many months now, so I'm glad we're here. So my question to you, Mr. Chair, is are we going to be hearing from some point from other community groups or organizations that have been have a vested interest or explored this topic? I'm just not sure what the agenda is for this time.
Yeah. So, and I tried to explain that in the beginning, but there are many groups here. There is time at the end for us to have folks share comments and thoughts. I think after the many conversations I had prior to this meeting, it sounds like that we need to and we will plan additional meetings that are more geared towards public interaction and comment that we will have prior or following this. And so it's my intention to create space at the end of this meeting for the public and any community group to share their thoughts in that audience participation period. But then for us to this is not the end, right? This is the meeting for us to learn about these things and for us to allow the process to move forward. But as Chief Curl said, recently policies change all the time, so we need to keep the conversation going. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there will be an opportunity for people to speak at this meeting. But our intention is, knowing that that's probably not enough, that we're planning more.
Great, thanks. And I guess that does raise an additional question, which doesn't have to be answered now, but I'll go ahead and just put it in the record. So I guess what does having more iterations of communications mean in terms of the timeline for getting body cameras out on the streets? Because I know there's a big push to get them out on the streets, but there's also a big push to have more dialogue, and sometimes those can be competing interests there. So would love to delve into that at some point. But my question for Captain Case. So on the last slide 6, could you just delve a little bit more into this particular piece and why it's a good idea, both for the privacy of the officers, but as well as for the safety of any individual community members? I will say I have a couple of concerns about the policy, and this is one of them. So if you could just delve into a little bit more, that'd be helpful for me.
In terms of the slide that he's put up, recording if we're having conversations with other employees discussing the case and things like that.
Correct.
Sure. I guess I almost want to ask a question to follow up your question, just to kind of better understand what the primary concern is with, like, if I call the municipal prosecutor's office on a domestic violence assault and I want advice on either charging or whether the decision to make an arrest or not arrest, if I could use that example, just to help me understand what the primary concern is that you have and why that's an issue for you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think what I will do is I will just provide a quick comment, which is, and I guess question, which is, why was the policy crafted in this way versus a let's record everything and redact later way?
Well, I'll tell you there are folks that we have contact with that want to have a conversation with law enforcement, like the district attorney's office when you wake them up, or the prosecutors, you wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're asking them questions about how to how to go about charging somebody. And those conversations, they're asking questions and we're providing real-time information. And there's definitely a concern, I think, from everybody that having that recording going all the time, that you can't have a real frank conversation about the merits of the case, the things that are involved in the case. There are things that are relevant or not relevant. Sometimes officers ask those questions that may not be relevant in the case, and we get that sort of information when we talk to prosecutors. Federal agents and talking to federal prosecutors, there's a different set of rules that we have to actually go by in terms of recording conversations with them and whether we can or can't do it. So it's a very common thing that's put into most, well, I think pretty much all body-worn camera policies. I mean, there may be a few out there that don't have it, but it's certainly the exception. This also covers in the policy the section about, if you have any personal emergency call that was to come up while you're on the call, but like, let's say you're in your car and, having that information recorded. So those are all the kind of the things that were involved in determining whether or not we were going to record or just kind of have the body-worn camera recording from virtually the time that you start your shift until the time that your shift's over.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And I do have a couple of other questions in the queue. There was a question posted before, and it's again not traditional for us to take questions from the public during this, but I think it's fine. We want to make sure we get all the questions answered. So there is a question that is going to the Department of Law, and if we can hold on that question until this presentation's over, I'll have the Department of Law come back and address that one. And then, yeah, that's great. So the Dean Gates essentially says, please don't use the chat questions. You don't use the chat for questions and answers. Many persons that call in telephonically to listen cannot see the chat in this public meeting. As the chair mentioned, there is time for public comment later on the agenda. So if you're a member of the public, we would appreciate if you hold your questions until that portion of the meeting, so we make sure to get them on the record. Okay. And I have a question from Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. And I had to step away for a minute. So if this was covered, you can just tell me, John, recording, and I will happily do that. So two, one is, I was thinking about SROs. You're in the schools and for a variety of things, mostly bonding with the students and so on. They're largely juveniles. And my reading is that the cameras would be on during, when they were in school. Is that, I don't know, it bothers me a little bit. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the direction that we'd be giving our SROs at this point in the process, keep in mind that, this is subject to change a little bit, but the general idea is that when the SROs are in the schools and they're walking the halls and they're kind of doing the activities that you're talking about, that the body-worn cameras are not going to be turned on and rolling. And again, there's pros and cons to that. But I think the idea is that the large majority of the activities that our SROs are involved in the schools are non-enforcement. And so those activities are really relationship building and, kind of establishing that rapport with students. And, we have, for those of you who aren't familiar with our SRO program, we have such a great relationship with the students in the schools. And our SROs have been in that program for some of them 10 years or more. So they really have a passion for that. And so that relationship that they develop is important. Now, if there's a call for service that is going to require some sort of enforcement on the part of the officer, I think the public has the expectation that, the cameras will be rolling for that sort of activity. So for that sort of activity, we'll have the cameras on.
All right, thanks. Can I follow up on that and then ask a second one?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, so a little bit on that. So when someone's wearing this camera, can is it obvious to the person who would be in the picture taken of it that it's off?
So that depends on the camera. The camera is obviously pretty large, so you're going to notice that the camera exists. In terms of it recording, there's a red light on some of them. So it really depends on the manufacturer that we will choose. So I'd probably have to wait to answer that question fully until we actually get the product.
Okay, that'd be useful if you were talking in confidence. You'd assume it's going unless you had a clear indication it wasn't. So another one, and if you covered this, just tell me. But there's the issue of when can officers review the footage? And I guess there was kind of a split where they could for most, but then some things they couldn't. And I know that's been controversial when that would be. And I just remember I was on a coroner's inquest decades ago, and over the course of a year, what someone had said they saw, right after the event, and what they saw and said a year later was so vastly different. And I challenged the judge. I said, "Does that make sense?" Because so far, and the judge said, "Well, people forget over time," and it was wildly different. So, but you have that situation. So, I mean, what happens if an officer recounts something, the year later, and it's totally different from what's on the camera? What happens in the court? Or I guess broader implications you can find in.
So if you don't mind, I'll hold on that question because there's a slide that talks about when officers can't record. So I'll touch on that just a little bit when I get to that slide, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. I'm done, Cameron. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, sir.
So still at restrictions. We don't want to record where people have a reasonable expectation of privacy. This is we're not attorneys, so there's no legal language inside the policy. We kind of use that reasonable expectation of privacy. We're comfortable with that language within law enforcement. We deal with that type of language on a regular basis. So, you walk into a bathroom, you shouldn't have the recorder on because there are people in there that have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That also exists in other locations to include you go into a mental health facility or a hospital, and you shouldn't be recording every single thing that happens in a hospital because, again, you're not there to record other people. So our officers are to be mindful of that. That doesn't mean that that's going to be perfect, but we definitely want to make sure that our officers, particularly in Alaska, and where I think we all agree that our expectation of privacy is pretty high here. Additional restriction is private residences. And this is an interesting topic, particularly, being in this profession for as long as I have. And sometimes I like to put this in context when I talk about this. We have interactions with members of the public that are not having a good day on a regular basis. And sometimes there's substance use and misuse involved. Sometimes there is mental health crisis involved. There are different living conditions. There are different life circumstances. And, we've had many conversations, and I would say we have a high level of concern and awareness that when we go inside of a residence with a body-worn camera on, it's different than when you go inside a residence with an audio recorder going. Those are two completely different circumstances. And as I mentioned before, the body-worn camera is gonna pick up a whole heck of a lot more than what the human eye will, and it's gonna capture it. So, part of this training program is to be very considerate and cautious when we go into private residence. And an example would be, and I like to use domestic violence because we have a high rate of domestic violence in Anchorage and in the entire state of Alaska, and so we see it a lot, and it's a sensitive topic. And so you can imagine when we have a domestic violence case where the victim goes to a neighbor house to report, and then an officer goes to that house to take the report from that victim. Now we're going into an uninvolved third party. And so again, we need to be mindful of that as well, that now we're going into someone's house that didn't actually even call the police. So we just need to be considerate and mindful when we do go into private residences.
Hey, Sean.
So, yep.
Sorry, I actually missed somebody that was in the queue. Commissioner Apoc, do you want to ask a question or have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, Captain Case, I know you're trying to just work through your slides, and of course there's a ton, and I know I'm sure you're going to cover some of ours. I had a question though also for law, and again, if I can just get it on record, and if we want to follow back up after we get through these slides, that's fine with me. But I did have a question about if the briefing that law gave, if they have that in writing somewhere that's also posted, and maybe I missed that. But I was wondering, and the reason I'm asking is I was wondering, you know, it was a pretty brief overview from law, and I'm wondering which laws they're referring to that they looked at for releasing footage. You know, I think that there's a lot of ways that this can be done in a way that increases public trust, but also ensures due process. So it doesn't have to be a release it all or nothing kind of thing, but kind of something in between where at least critical incidents are being maybe used with records requests, you know, something in between. So I just wanted to at least put it on record, and maybe we can follow back up with law after we get through the slides. And thanks for letting me get that in there, and appreciate the patience, Captain Case.
Thanks. Yeah, I would, if it's okay with folks, I would really prefer that we get through the presentation that DC Case is doing, and then Department of Law we can come back to them at the end.
Okay, so this slide is going to touch on a previous question that we had about use of deadly force and kind of memory. So there's 3 areas that that are in the policy right now restrict when officers can view the body-worn camera footage. The first, if there's an in-custody death, and obviously that includes officer using deadly force. So an officer involved shooting would fall into that category. Now, if there's use of deadly force resulting in serious physical injury, so we do use a deadly force on someone, but they don't die, that would fit under this particular section. And then when an employee is subject to a criminal investigation, obviously there's a separate process that the employee goes through, like a member of the public when there's a criminal investigation. And so they won't have the ability to review the footage under the current draft of the policy. So Mr. Weddleton, to really get into the answer of your question, so the way, from the police department standpoint, when we have an officer that's involved in a serious use of force, what we are interested in is what the officer recalls at the time that the officer used force. And when an officer views the video footage, there's a lot of information that is available to them that they did not perceive at the time that the incident has happened. And I'll kind of use a scenario to illustrate kind of what I'm talking about, and hopefully I'll answer your question a little bit better. Over many uses of deadly force here within the department, and we followed this practice through our current policy and practice that we have in place that we have for several years. So we've had officer involved shootings or the use of deadly force that has had some sort of video attached to it. And we haven't allowed the officers to view the footage. And when the case is completely resolved, officers can view that when the case is completely over, the administrative, the criminal, the administrative, all that sort of stuff. And in just about every single case, the officer sees and has a different view of the incident after the video was observed, because they're seeing things that they didn't see at the time. And that becomes challenging when you conduct an investigation and they're now thinking about what they saw versus what they recall. So hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Weddleton. If not, I can kind of try a different route.
No, well, I guess it's all kind of tricky, but as you're taking, if there's that kind of level of incident, you're doing an interview with the officer right away. And kind of my thought, that coroner's inquest, that was a year or more later, and whereas you have it much more compressed. You have a statement right away. I mean, or would he go to court? I just, I guess, but they could go to court with a case years later and tell a story very different than or do they get to review their interview notes from right after the incident before they would go to court?
So on your standard police investigation, the officer will be able to review the the body-worn camera footage and the audio to help them write the report and use as a way to recall what they wrote or what they saw a year, 2 years, 3 years later. The specific carve out is just for these 3 requirements here. And yeah, on a investigation that involved a theft or a burglary, having an officer try to recall what happened a year or 2 years later is going to be challenging. So that's why they are allowed to view the body worn camera footage. It's just the physiological responses in the human body when there's a significant incident like an in custody death or a use of deadly force is different from your standard call, or what I'd refer to as a standard call that officers respond to. So,
John, did that answer your question?
Yeah, large. I mean, there's so much involved with this, and I'm not the expert on this. It just stuff kind of goes through, and so I know it's a big issue. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. I have one other question for you before you move on. Member Dunbar, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I have 2 questions. One, I probably isn't appropriate for this slide, although it is related to this footage. I think obviously the question of when this specific footage is released to the public from these kind of incidents. I know we'll probably have a longer conversation about that later, but that I think is the rub for a lot of people that are interested in this policy. My other question with this slide is, so employees are subject of a criminal investigation. That strikes me as much less common than a sort of administrative investigation or an administrative process for discipline where the employee is represented. So how does this footage interact with that process, Chief McCoy? I'm sorry, Deputy Chief Case. So, a representative, presumably there's a representative for the employee that helps be their advocate in that administrative process. And do they get to look at the footage? How does that work?
So again, the carve out is for the use of deadly force. If you take that off the table, our represented employees certainly are entitled to watch their video, have access to everything they produce before they go into administrative investigation. And quite frankly, these investigations aren't designed to be a gotcha for the employee.
Sure.
However, when there is a criminal and administrative investigation that involves one of these 3 situations, or really the top 2 is what you're referring to, no, the union employee and their representative don't get to view the video prior to going in. And again, what we're trying to preserve is what the officer recalls at the time, and not any information that the employee receives after the incident that may distort or create issues with their recall. We're really looking for memory recall here, and not allowing officers to view this footage is also not a gotcha, right? This isn't, we're not trying to catch our officers and put them in a position where they slip up. We just want to reserve what's in their mind and in their memory, because that is what they're going to be judged on in a civil suit, and in a criminal suit as well. So a criminal case. So that's the answer to the second part of your question. The first part of your question, I got a slide here. I think we're 2 slides away from being done. So I'll get to that in just 1 second.
Okay, Mr. Chair, can I ask a quick follow-up to this?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Sean. You said something that was interesting, and perhaps I misunderstood. So when a represented employee is a subject of an investigation, is it sort of by its nature criminal, if that makes sense? Is there a distinction between a criminal investigation and an administrative investigation within the police department? Obviously there is when you involve a prosecutor, but within the police department, is there a distinction?
Yeah, there's 2 separate tracks. So if we have a complaint or an allegation that comes into the police department that is remotely criminal in nature. So, an officer books somebody into jail, and the person that was booked into jail says I had a wallet with, money in it, and it's no longer there. that by its very nature is potentially a criminal allegation. The officer is potentially being accused of stealing the wallet or the money. And so even something as I don't want to say small, but as simplistic as that goes completely out of the administrative investigation. It goes to the criminal side. So it goes to detectives. Our internal affairs investigators don't have anything to do with that because there's a different set of rules that apply, and it goes completely criminal. They do the entire investigation on that allegation to determine whether in fact it is a criminal allegation and to determine whether or not there's probable cause for arrest. And if there is, they go through that complete process. Once that process is completed, then it gets turned over to the administrative side of the house, and the administrative investigation begins to determine whether or not there's any policy violations. There's different rules in terms of when and how we can engage and talk to employees. Remember, the officers, even under the color of authority, if they are accused of committing a crime, they still get all the rights of every citizen that's out there. So that's preserved in the criminal side of the investigation. The administrative side, not so much, because they're employees of the department. There are certain rules that will allow us to tell the employee they have to answer our questions regarding investigation. So two completely separate processes, and they have to maintain independently their integrity.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. I see no other questions. Now I'll have go ahead and continue.
Deleting and releasing recordings. First, the deletion portion of that. It's going to require approval all the way up to the deputy chief. I was going to put a picture of myself in there, but I didn't think anyone would find that as funny as I do. But so it's going to take pretty high level of approval before an officer can delete that recording. And you know, myself and Chief Crow will be aware of what's being deleted, not being deleted. So because that bar is set so high, that also kind of causes the employees to make sure they're really paying attention a little bit more, so they don't have to come and ask, you know, one of the chiefs to have a recording deleted. So that's where we set that bar. And then releasing recordings, what we're primarily relying on is Anchorage Municipal Code 3.90, access to public records, and that's going to govern the release. And you know, I'll push most of this off to legal to answer questions that have to do with this. But what I can say from a police perspective and from an APD perspective is we would love to build like a nice cute box and put everything in its fine place in that box, so it's really clear on how things are released. That's kind of the type of people we are anyway. But this is a case-by-case basis, and it depends on many different factors. And very frequently, when we have some of the cases that the public's real concerned about in terms of releasing and how soon it can be released, generally we have a conversation with legal prior to releasing any of that sort of stuff, even though we have volumes written on when and how we release stuff, just because there are some complicated aspects to it. So the police department, what I can tell you, is not the sole determiner of what gets released or not. We have a broader conversation with the people that's their job to know that legally a little bit better. With that, I will take any additional questions that anyone has on any of the slides or anything I didn't cover.
It doesn't look like we have questions at this point, but I do believe, Chief Curl, you were going to talk a little bit about timeline and what some of the expectations are on that. So if you would like to share that, that'd be great.
Okay, before I get there, Sean, I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. The police department, the policy, it's our policy. It needs to meet our operational needs. It needs to be legally justifiable. And Sean, before I go into the timeline and my explanation, I want you to, we actually have hundreds of policies, and we don't just produce them willy-nilly. Sean, you've been the crafter of the body camera. Just get back on there and tell people what actually goes into making a policy. Where do we come up with the criteria for our policy, what we use to create a policy, so that there's a better understanding that this isn't just a policy that's done to meet the whims of the police department. There's actually a lot that goes into this when we create a policy.
Yeah, so I mean, part of that goes to the history. You know, we've been really pushing hard, we being just the country, for body worn cameras solidly for 10 years, and actually a little bit more than that, but pretty solidly for 10 years. And there was virtually no case law involved in body worn cameras when they first came out, because the difference between body worn cameras and dash cam video is a little bit different. And so in the last decade, you've had organizations like International Association of Chiefs of Police and PERF, the Department of Justice. Remember, we've got several federal consent decrees monitored by the Department of Justice and federal judges throughout the country that are still in effect. And I believe everyone but one of those agencies are required to have body-worn cameras. So we have a lot of federal judges that are that have some input on what these policies look like. So that's taken into consideration as well. And then we look at different state laws. And so when you grab a policy from Texas or Idaho or California, you know, we have to understand that they have different state laws, they have different state constitutions. They're in different federal circuits when we talk about civil lawsuits, civil cases that are filed. So there's a lot of different, you can't just pick up a policy and look at it and say, hey, why can't we have this exact policy in Anchorage? And I would say most of what's in the policy is very, very consistent that you see throughout the country. I don't want to say it's boilerplated, but some of the language is boilerplated because it's kind of viewed as best practices. Now, some of the language that we have in our policy where we kind of hold reverence to the right to privacy here, that's a little bit different. You're not going to see that strong a language outside of Alaska, but that's because of our state constitution. So, so all of those factors coming to whether or not we put something or don't put something in the policy. And we're having, as we speak, current case law that's being challenged throughout the federal circuits that may make this policy be modified or changed, you know, within the next 12 months. And so that has to constantly be monitored because it's a different type of intrusion into the privacy rights of the public.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So with that said, I'm going to try to set a timeline, and I'm just going to tell you, as a chief of police, I'm embarrassed that we've sat here and said a year ago that we expected body cameras at the end of 2021. We're here a year later, and to tell you the truth, we're really not that much closer to having body cameras. So I'm not going to give you a date that we're going to have body cameras, but I am going to tell you where we are. So we're going to listen to the feedback we get today. We have a policy that we think is good going forward, and we're going to get the input. If we can make some modifications to this policy, we will. We'll look at it, and by the end of March, by the beginning of March, we will have reviewed the comments from today, and that is going to be my version of the policy for the Anchorage Police Department, the one that we modified by March 1st. From there, we're going to make sure that legal doesn't have a problem with it. If they agree with it, we're going to go forward from there. So the next step is the tricky step. The body camera is a change in working conditions. With a change in working conditions, that requires us to go to the union. We're going to have to go to the union and get this body camera policy approved by them. And we've already discussed it with them. We're not waiting. Like I said, we're embarrassed that it has taken this long. So we've already shown them our body camera policy, and they've expressed some concerns. Once the policy is finalized at the beginning of March, we will give them that policy, and they'll express their concerns to us. And I think there's going to be some overwhelming concerns that is going to prevent us from implementing the policy right away. I really do. And if that happens, we're going to have to go to collective bargaining. And collective bargaining could take a month, 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. I cannot tell you how long the collective bargaining is going to be. I can't tell you what the disagreements are going to be yet, but there are going to be disagreements based on talks we've had. So I can't give you the timeline there. But I can tell you that once this policy is done, I will know the requirements that I am going to have my officers on the body camera itself. I will go forward and I will choose a body camera that is going to be suitable for the Anchorage Police Department. I will then take that body camera and I will decide how many I'm going to buy and go forward and start training my officers. And now that was a big question. How many are you going to buy? Well, I am looking you square in the eye and I'm telling you, I am not buying 421 body cameras. I'm not going to outfit my entire department. And this is why. I don't have the personnel at my Anchorage Police Department to process all the discovery and FOIA requests for a body camera for every officer. Last year alone, I had over 9,500 arrests. Every single one of those are going to be subject to discovery. The year before, I had over 11,000 arrests. Every single one of those are going to be subject to discovery. I am going to need to outfit my records section to be able to adapt and overcome the burden that's going to be placed on them from body camera footage. And that's just internally. I have external problems as well. The Department of Law, the criminal division, has already told me that they can't even keep up with discovery. They can't download discovery in time now. So we need to create a link somehow where the Department of Law, both city and the state, can get the discovery that we put up in the cloud that we're going to get. And I can't make the Department of Law purchase the computer software, bring on new people. I can't make the district attorney do that either. I cannot do that. I am not, as the chief of police, going to have my officers go out there and arrest people and have a single case dismissed because discovery wasn't able to get by either the city attorney or the district attorney. So I am telling you now, I will implement body cameras when I can, but it's going to be on a limited basis at first. I will decide how many body cameras I buy, whether it's 5 or 6 per shift. I will institute that, and we will work out the problems that we have with the city and with the state so that going forward, we will outfit our entire force with body cameras going forward. So, but I am going to make sure that that discovery, the FOIA request from the great citizens of the municipality, can be met. So that's my timeline. I'm not going to give you an end date. We still have a lot to overcome. We do. The Anchorage Police Department wants body cameras, but we're going to do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize criminal cases. We're going to do it in a way that makes sure that everything is done properly that meets our operational needs and also meets our our legal liabilities. I know that's kind of harsh, but unfortunately, I want to tell you the truth, and that's the honest to God truth. You will never hear anything from me except fact and truth, and that's where we stand right now as a police department.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chief. I do have a question coming in from Commissioner Kloster.
Yes, I had a couple questions actually. One, I'll just ask them both. Do you have the funding to implement all the body cameras and the technology that you talked about that you're going to need to store all of this? And then the second question, as you mentioned, not being able to outfit all of the officers with it. So how do you make that decision on who gets body cameras and then who doesn't?
Kendra, that's a good question. Do I have the funding? Yes, I do have the funding. Thanks to the Proposition 8, I believe it was, the 1.8 million, even though we're not even going to touch that money this year, we actually went out and we're using the money from the technology that everyone keeps, the citizens of Anchorage voted for. We need 2 years of that money for my CAT RMS project. CAT RMS says it's so much more important than body cameras. I can't tell you, that's the brains, the hearts, that's everything of the police department. We got the funding for that and we're moving forward with that. I do have a grant that will pay for body cameras, and I have the additional money that can match the funds that I'll use this year for the body cameras. And going forward, we have the additional money that will be able to match the grant funds to outfit the entire department. How will I choose which officers get it? Well, like I said, I will probably put 5 or 6 per shift. I will ask for volunteers. If I don't have volunteers, I will tell people that they will have body cameras, but I'll make sure they go across all 3 shifts. The patrol shifts is where I'm going to put them first, but I need to make sure that the district attorney and the city attorneys aren't inundated with discovery that they cannot handle. Like I said, I am not going to let a single person that we arrest be set free because we can't get the discovery to the prosecuting agencies in time.
Kendra, did that answer your question, or do you have any follow-up?
No, I'm okay right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. I have a few questions in the queue. Commissioner Apoc, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and I know, again, we're trying to go back to legal. I know a couple people had folks in legal, so I know we're a little out of order again. But my comment is, I appreciate taking the time to meet with you all last week, and this co-meeting I think is really helpful to have everyone in one spot. It seems like, though, if we have so much to work through and we really want this to serve both the police department's operational and administrative needs, as well as the intentions of public trust, then we should take the necessary time. And I don't think, it should be embarrassing that we've taken the time to do this. I think it really shows that people are collaborative and want to be a part of this. And so my only comment is to, I don't want to rush out and put out a policy then that doesn't serve the needs of APD. Likewise, the citizens of Anchorage, with things like backed up FOIA requests and all the factors that come into play with all the other agencies. So that's my only comment, is I encourage us to do this kind of conversation to make sure we're putting out a policy not that isn't rushed, but that's actually thorough and gets through all of these points that we're wrestling through right now. So just a comment, and appreciate this forum. And I know we have other questions and want to go back to legal as well.
Hey, Charlene, I'm going to address your question. The policy we put out will meet our operational needs. It will. I'm not going to put a policy out there that wouldn't meet our needs. And one thing that we need to remember is that, like I said, we have hundreds of policies. We change policies all the time. We update policies all the time. That's, if something comes down the road, like Deputy Chief Case was saying, could be new case law that comes out. We will update our policy. We don't have a problem with doing that at all. We just need to make sure that the updates meet their operational needs of the police department and meet the liability required by legal.
Yeah. And I wanted to take this opportunity to respond to Member Rivera's question, which relates to this, and that is that do we, what is the sort of plan moving forward? And what I'm hearing is that what you've said, Chief, is that we take all of the feedback that we've received up till now. You finalize the policy as it stands now and move forward with the union and work through that. At the same time, that doesn't end the ability for the community to have comment about this. We can create more spaces for the community to learn about and talk about this policy and policing in general. And if through that additional feedback and additional ideas and additional things come, that can always be considered by you and your department. As you said, this is a dynamic process, and so I would just hope that, this is just me personally, that we could do both, right? We could stamp this policy and allow it to move forward, knowing that we want to get cameras out on the street, and continue the conversation and continue the ability for the community to be involved and have conversations about it. So that would be my recommendation.
That's absolutely correct, Cameron. And the key to remember here is, like I said, we are open and honest. We will always be honest and forthright coming forward. And if there's a suggestion from the public and it's a controversial issue, we'll tell you why it's not in our policy. It's really simple. We're not going to say just because we said so. There's a reason why it won't be in our policy, and we'll tell you what that reason is. We will give you a justification for why that is not in our policy.
Okay.
So,
great.
Like I said, we're not trying to hide anything. We need to make sure it meets our needs. We want to make sure the public is satisfied with the policy, but it will meet our needs. But we will tell you, hey, we appreciate that, and we do. We appreciate all the comments from all the organizations, from the individuals. We appreciate all the comments out there, and we've taken all that into consideration. But if we don't take the input from you, there is a reason why, and we will give you that reason why. We will justify the reason why it is not in our policy.
That's great. I do have Mr. Rivera in the queue, and I know there is a desire to go back to legal. Mr. Rivera, would you like to ask your question, and then we can flip back over to legal and have them respond to a question?
Yeah, thanks. So two things. First is, and both I think are directed to the chief. So first is, I just want to dissect a little bit on some of the timeline here, because I think members of the public really want to know sort of when their feedback is going to be valuable and when it's not. And, you know, the way that I am imagining this, at some point, this is going to go to a negotiating table with the police union. And at that point, there's going to be a point where you can't accept any new things when you're at the negotiating table. Like, you have to close the door. This is what you're working with. And that's that. Is that accurate statement?
Well, Felix, it is accurate. Like I said, the body camera itself is subject to collective bargaining. So once we get it approved, once we get it worked through the union, when we do update our policies, we have many steps to go through that. It goes through, there's a committee that reviews it. All the commanders review it. The chief has to approve it. Deputy chief looks at it. It goes to city legal. And one of those steps is it does go to the union. The union will look at any change we make to any policy to make sure that it doesn't violate the contract or the collective bargaining agreement. That is part of our steps. So, like I said, I will finalize the policy. We will always take new input, but we want to get the ball rolling. We want to get it moving. There will always be changes. We have a way of doing changes, and it gets reviewed by everybody. It gets approved, and then we make the changes. So it's a constant flow of information, constant changing. So, I mean, the constant flow is always accepted, and we'll look at it. And if we see something that comes in from the public, it's like, holy cow, how did we not see that? We will obviously implement that. But this has been a pretty thorough process. And after today's meeting, with the input we received from the community members that are listening, from the assembly members that are listening, we will finalize the policy by the beginning of March, and that's the one we plan to go forward with the expectation that in the future, there will be changes as well.
Okay, thanks. I think it's important we set a clear expectation for the public, and that's helpful. I guess second really quick question. So I appreciate your concerns regarding staffing. Will you be putting in any staffing requests in the first quarter budget revisions?
You read my mind. I am going to ask for 5 additional people. That's I've done something internally already to create 2 new positions just to deal with an uptick that I anticipate with just a partial implementation. But I have, one of my requests will be for 5 additional people in my record section to deal with the expected FOIA requests and discovery from body cameras.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and this is Patrick Burke from Department of Law. I want to clarify, I think the Chief Curl was asked if he has the money for the cameras, and I appreciate his answer, but the answer that he provided, the question simply isn't, do you have enough money for the cameras? The question should be, do you have enough money for the cameras and to support the infrastructure that's going to be needed to store the video, redact the video, and produce the video? And I think the answer there is the cost. We don't know what those costs are going to look like right now, because we're still trying to figure out how the infrastructure to support the body camera policy is going to work. But I anticipate that there's going to be it's a lot more expensive and it's a lot more complicated than simply, do we have enough money for the cameras? And the additional staffing will also have to occur here in the executive branch, because we're going to need, we anticipate 3 more staff members in the criminal division, in addition to another attorney downstairs, and then here in civil to respond to subpoenas and public records requests. We anticipate at least another attorney in civil and probably 2 to 3 more staff people in civil. So in addition to the camera costs, we're looking at, anywhere from 2 additional attorneys and probably 6 more staff members. And those costs have not yet been, we have an idea of what those costs might look like, but until we get the policy done, we won't know how much infrastructure will be needed to support the video that's being produced.
And this is Deputy Municipal Attorney Blair Christensen. I just wanted to clarify on one of Assemblymember Rivera's questions about the timelines and whether we can engage in more conversations once we start negotiations. I think the answer is generally no. Once we start negotiations with the union, that policy is probably in a static place at that point. And legally, whether we can change the policy after we've engaged in negotiations, depends on a variety of legal factors. How we arrived at that policy, if negotiations can be concluded with the parties agreeing in the negotiation process, negotiations can be concluded by going through an arbitration process. If it is concluded by going through an arbitration process, then at least the subject that was the area of the policy that was subject to arbitration is probably fairly static. So I don't know. I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that from my understanding, the point of concern from the union is not necessarily what we're hearing in terms of the point of concern from the community. And so the issue that the union's going to have is likely different than the changes that are being talked about and requested from the community. I mean, it's possible that it'll overlap, but at this point, what we're hearing is those aren't the same. So
I think that's correct, but my experience in negotiation is that negotiation tends to encompass lots more than what you think prior to going into it.
Yeah, thanks. And I have a question from Commissioner Edenshaw.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the presenters. And I have my camera off because I'm in my car, not driving. I don't know if this question is for legal or for APD, but it was brought up that the cameras would not be on during primary, like they wouldn't be on when officers would approach to residencies. And so what about in the case with like a search warrant or, any sort of like if we know someone's being held hostage or like on those kind of calls out on those kind of calls. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
DC Case, would you like to respond to that question, or Chief Curl?
Yeah. So the policy, if you've taken a look at it, it's got like a whole list of very specific examples right under where we talk about that calls for service or contacts with the public, and both of what you're talking about right there are listed in that long list of things. And it's one of the reasons why we didn't just leave it as when you're doing police work or when you have a contact with the public, turn on your camera, because we see over and over again with our own employees that there's about 20 questions that get generated off of something that we intend to be pretty simple, and the person who's actually doing the job comes up with examples of that are outside of kind of that scope. So both of those addresses are addressed in the policy.
Commissioner Edenshaw, did that answer your question, or do you have any follow-up?
No, it did. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding, because what was presented was, when it comes to, cops coming to, like, for instance, my resident, then they wouldn't have their camera on. And so I think that there are going to be a lot of nuances and just gray areas. And so I appreciate you answering my questions, Captain Kate.
Okay, I think what we'll do now is go back to the Department of Law, and I believe there was a question from Commissioner Apoc and also from Commissioner Price about the legal justification for the policy and whether that was going to be produced in writing. So would the Department of Law respond to that question, please?
We have not created a legal opinion. We do not intend to create a legal opinion going forward. Our advice is to municipal departments. Our ethical obligations are to municipal departments, which means that the attorney-client privilege applies to those communications. And so we do not anticipate breaking that privilege. And we also have not created an opinion. So at this point, there would be nothing to release.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Commissioner Apoc.
Yes, go ahead.
So thanks for sharing that response. I think though one of broader than that is we're asking for which laws were referred to when creating the review. We're looking at the review. So I think it's a bit broader than that. So are there specifics on that you can share?
So that is covered within the attorney-client privilege, and we do not intend to disclose privileged communications between us and APD. I mean, we can certainly, the public records law has been posted on the slide. It's 3.90. But the other laws to which you're referring is attorney work product with regards to, you know, many tens of federal cases and Alaska state cases. And we do not intend to provide that analysis.
Commissioner Abuck, any follow-up or further questions from you? Okay, I don't hear anything. I do have another question from Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, I think this is sort of the point of contention, and I think you all know that, no surprise here. So I went back and I listened to the Assembly's intent when we put the proposition on the ballot that eventually was approved by a large majority of the voters. And we made it very clear that our intent was to give a tool, what some call the fundamental need, others call a legacy piece of infrastructure that would be beneficial and protect both members of our community as well as APD officers. So it's really hard for me to square the intent of the Assembly and the intent of the voters with the strict policy and the responses that we're getting here with regard to releasing video to the public. And especially given some statements and motions that were filed in court last week by the municipality's attorneys, I'm very concerned that the municipality plans to never release footage of police shootings to the public, period. And that isn't at all what the voters wanted when they supported this proposition and voted to increase their property taxes. So what's the issue here, right? We keep sort of talking around it, keep making these very broad statements, and it's very difficult to really understand why we're not able to square the following our Alaska Constitution with regards to privacy and our Alaska laws with regard to privacy, as well as ensuring accountability and transparency of our police department. I mean, the two can't be mutually exclusive. I don't accept that premise. So what can we do to achieve some type of middle ground here?
Hey, Mr. Assemblymember Rivera, have you read the policy? Because the policy says that we are going to release footage pursuant to the code and the law.
Yes, I have read the policy. I have investigated the policy. I have talked with national experts about the policy. And frankly, what the public's expectation is of what would happen with regard to release, specifically, we're talking here about use of force, serious use of force, and deadly use of force, right? And I am just very concerned, just based on the municipality's position, that those types of footage aren't going to be released. It's going to be very redacted if it does get released.
I think that you can anticipate it's probably going to be redacted, but I think that, I mean, you can talk to national experts. It's probably better to talk to experts in Alaska, but there is United States Supreme Court law on victims' rights to privacy. There is Alaska case law on the rights to privacy. There is a morass of law on this subject. And so I think what the legal department is telling you is that we do not think that some automatic release of information is in compliance with those laws, whether it's case law or statutory. And to that end, whenever APD really receives a records request, those requests are reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and we release what records we can pursuant to any and all of those laws.
Thanks. At this point, I think we're just sort of talking in circles. So I appreciate that response. I just really hope that we are able to meet the community's expectations when the community voted to increase their taxes to get body-worn cameras on police officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
And this is Patrick Burke, and the Department of Law is guidance is to meet those expectations to the fullest extent of the law. And I think it's worth noting, Assemblymember Rivera, that Alaska has some of the strongest privacy rights in the country, if not the strongest, based on the amendment to Article 1 of our Constitution. And so I appreciate that you've talked to national experts, but I would encourage you to reach out to experts here in Alaska, given Alaska's privacy rights. The Supreme Court has spent the better part of 40 years relying on the amendment to our Constitution, and really the gist of it is that people choose to live in Alaska not because it's easy, but because we enjoy a level of autonomy here, not found anywhere else in the country. And so the privacy rights in Alaska, this isn't the Department of Law, generating thoughts and ideas that to obstruct or to somehow not give the voters what they want. But we have a duty to advise on the law of Alaska.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Nope, can continue. And if members of the public would please refrain from sharing at this point, you'll have your opportunity to do that at the end. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just want to ensure that that's clear to everybody who's listening and to the public, because the Department of Law is not attempting to somehow skirt what the expectations of the voters of the public are here. Our duty is to provide sound legal advice to the municipal government, and we're doing that, and we're doing what we can to ensure that the law is followed.
I just have one final rebuttal, Mr. Chair, and then I'm happy to just let it go for now. But I appreciate the continual assistance to talk to Alaska experts, as if I hadn't, but I have. I have talked to Alaska experts. I have talked to Alaska barred attorneys who tell me that the policy put forward by the police department and by the Department of Law is too restrictive. You can do more things, but I'm not an attorney myself. I think the attorney needs to get in a room and they need to figure this out. And I really hope that folks are open to having that type of conversation. With that, I will end my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Rivera, I would appreciate, I'm happy to talk to any of the experts that you consulted with or any of the attorneys. As you know, I've been pretty open and transparent with the Department of Law over the last 8 months, and I'm more than happy to sit down. I would love to hear something or to get insight to this that we haven't thought about or looked at. So please give that information to me. I'm happy to reach out to those people, and hopefully we'll learn something.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to move on. We have one other person in the queue, Ms. Allard.
Thank you. So Blair and Patrick, thank you so much for all you do. As Assembly members, we're here to make laws, not enforce them. And we really backed really close to the line on the constitutional law on this as far as what we tried to implement with the body as Assembly members. So I appreciate your efforts. But I also want to state that the people of the MOA voted for body cams. They did not vote to violate individual privacy. So I think that needs to be fully aware. And also, I would like to say that regardless if you're innocent, guilty, a police officer, or a citizen, everybody needs to be treated with the privacy that our Constitution allows for these individuals. So I trust what the MOA is doing. You're protecting all, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Allard. I don't see anybody else in the queue at this point. I just want to double check if anybody from APD or the Department of Law has any sort of final comments before we move into, or any folks on our body have anything before we move into public comment. So Patrick and Blair, anything else from you at this point?
just wanted to say one thing. This is Blair. The policy as written puts absolutely no restrictions on the release of information. All it says is that we will comply with the law on it. And so in my mind, it is the broadest possible language that we could have ever put in the policy, because it says to the extent that the law allows, we will release the records. It doesn't place any other limitations on the release of records but that.
Thank you. Chief, anything else to add before you move to public comment?
No, Cameron, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. All right.
Mr. Chair.
I do see, yep, Mr. Dunbar is in the queue. Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
I'm sorry, I had one quick question just after that. Ms. Christensen had stated something there, and I just wanted to see if I could clarify it a little bit. We have this broad language about, we will release footage, as much as the law allows. Does that, I guess, could you restate? And maybe you're not the right person to say this. Maybe it's one of the folks in the police chain of command. But is that in response to a public records request, or is the understanding from the policy? I know we've gone over this, but I want to say it again, that it will be released sort of in a more automatic fashion with these more serious, particularly in the events that have a lot of public interest, that it will be released without someone doing a public records request? Or is the assumption that public records request is sort of needed before any release happens?
Currently, a public records request is needed. The policy does not allow for the automatic release of records. It would have to come through a public records request.
Okay. Okay, interesting. All right, thank you, I appreciate it.
You're muted, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. There was a helicopter flying by, so I was trying to not have you exposed to all that noise. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the presentations. We're going to move into our our audience for participation portion of our meeting. Just a few reminders. Each person who speaks is going to be limited to 3 minutes. I'll set a little timer so you'll hear a sound when you are done. So I would really appreciate folks who speak if you would respect that time frame. And as always, let's keep our comments respectful and so that we can get through as many as we possibly can. We've got quite a bit of time here, so let's try to get through as many as we can. And we're just going to do it sort of first come, first serve. And I'll ask you to unmute by hitting *6 if you're on the phone, and state your name for the record. And then I will begin your time, and you will have 3 minutes. So is there someone who would like to start? Is there someone from the public who would like to begin? Yes, I see a hand raised. Go ahead and unmute and state your name for the record. And after you state your name, I will hit start.
Hi, yeah, Andy Erickson.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you for holding this public meeting. My name is Andy Erickson, and I'm an attorney in Anchorage. I think this conversation was very helpful and illuminating. I have 2 concerns that I wanted to share today, and they both have to do with transparency and accountability. And they have to do with public records laws. And I think, as many of you know, I have a great deal of experience in this matter, and I can tell you it's a frustrating process. First, APD has refused to respond to a public records request that I submitted on October 19th, 2021. My request was for all written comments on the APD body-worn camera policy. I wanted to see what other members of the public were concerned about, and I wanted to read their comments and see who they were. The comments were discussed during committee meetings last fall, and this committee specifically asked for those. So it's disappointing to see that APD has not taken its obligations under the Public Records Act seriously. I specifically asked Captain Case to send me those comments, and I have not heard back from him since October. I understand that APD has posted a heavily redacted version of those comments online, but that does not comply with the Public Records Act. None of the redactions are explained, and none of them are even remotely justifiable under the Public Records Act. And so when we talk about how the Public Records Act will govern the release of body-worn camera footage, that's a really big concern of mine because the Muni is not following the Public Records Act right now. And leads me to my second point, and that's that this policy really hinges on public records. And as Ms. Christensen just said, footage won't be released unless there's a public records request. Those often take up to and including 6 months, maybe even a year. They cost thousands of dollars for the public to get access to those. Is that the sort of policy that the voters had in mind when they passed a law providing funding for body-worn cameras? I don't think it does. And importantly, the municipality last week indicated in a court filing that it would never release footage of a police shooting that is requested through a public records request, even when that police shooting happened on the street. There is case law in Alaska. In Kodiak, the public media, Kodiak Public Media versus the Kodiak Police Department, the Superior Court ruled that there wasn't an interest in privacy for an event that happened out on the streets. And that's what we're talking about here. And so the municipality's filing last week saying it wouldn't release those is flat out contrary to existing case law in Alaska. So that concerns me. It concerns me a great deal. The ACLU has circulated draft language for an automatic release provision. I think that provision would be a step up. As Mr. Dunbar just said, it alleviates the need for the public to request that release for high-profile incidents. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. Okay, who would like to go next? I think I saw Moira in there.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon. My name is Moira Pahala. I am a member of the Anchorage community, and I'm also the advocacy manager for the ACLU of Alaska, and I live in Assembly District 5. I want to just take a moment to give my input on the body-worn camera policy that has been presented by APD, and just again call out the lack of accountability over our police department. Moreover, when Anchorage voters passed Proposition 4 last year, the community voted for further police accountability in response to the atrocious acts of police violence across the country. Time and time again, I've heard public officials claim that police violence is simply not an issue in our city, like it is in other states, but they are immensely mistaken. The recent dash cam footage of the killing of Dashar Hassan has proven that police violence is a in our state just as much as it is anywhere else in the country. Body cameras were meant to be a solution to this ongoing need for community accountability, but the community has hardly had a chance to lean their input on our concerns. The public input sessions that were held were not only poorly advertised, but did not create a welcoming environment for those who have been hurt by APD. Additionally, the comment link that was provided on the APD website was also poorly advertised and hard to find, with little communication to the public on who would be reviewing their comments and how they would be used. This isn't a platform where people feel inclined to share their stories or give their true input. APD's modes of gaining community input have not only been brief, but with little follow-up on what the implementation timeline looks like. This meeting is not a public input process. What member of the public is able to attend an arbitrary meeting on Teams on Friday from 1 to 3 p.m.? Not anyone I know with kids or who works a regular job. So these meetings are inaccessible to the public to join to give that input, especially during a pandemic. Under operation of the current policy, body cameras would not be used to be a true tool of public accountability, but a ploy to further harm on our communities caused by police. You know, many weeks ago, commenting on police community relations, our own chief said that he will try his best to convince the quote unquote few vocal minority people that badmouth the police. But I'm standing here today representing the ACLU. We are not a small group of people. This is a community-based issue that all people in Anchorage, should have the right to weigh in on. But so far, this has not been a democratic process. If the chief considers working to ensure that our community has accountability as bad-mouthing, then what hope is there for equitable access to accountability for our community? If we don't move forward with a policy that truly reflects what the community wants now, there's no point.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. Let's go to the next person. I think I saw Mike. Are you ready to go?
There are a few of us. Which one are you talking about?
Oh, sorry. I just saw Mike pop up. But since you're on, why don't you go ahead and go?
Thank you. For the record, this is Mike Garvey with the ACLU of Alaska. I appreciate the time that the Public Safety Advisory Commission and the Assembly have put into this meeting and the detail that we've been able to hear. I've especially appreciated the questions and comments that Assembly members and commissioners have asked. I don't feel especially confident in this policy after this meeting, to be honest. Certainly one of our primary areas of concern is the release of video, and it doesn't increase public trust that we've never seen the specific language that was vetted or have any detail about specific cases or laws that the Department of Law is leaning on. We've looked at cases, Alaska attorneys in our office, that it may have been applicable, and we don't see an issue with public release. The only cases we've seen refer to warrantless secret surveillance. That does not apply here in our view. So, even through working through a public records request process, why couldn't it be acceptable to make a commitment to prioritize those records requests showing a person, or for footage showing a person who's been killed, shot by a firearm, or grievously injured? That's a commitment that could be made through this policy. And if we're so concerned about privacy, why does the latest draft remove a provision protecting the First Amendment rights of people exercising their constitutional right to protest, or guarantee that footage that shows no crime is purged in a timely fashion, which would help defray costs? Why is there no proactive ban on using facial recognition? This is a policy that's going to primarily serve the police, not the public. As one example, there's nothing in here that explicitly allows subjects of video the right to view footage that they are in to see if they'd like to file a complaint because they don't feel good about the encounter that they had. Why is a parent not able to see video of their child who's been filmed? And the timeline here is distressing. I'm really worried about the union vetoing the prohibition on reviewing video in cases of in-custody deaths and uses of force. This has been a frustrating process, and I'm kind of distressed to learn that this is going to be finalized by May, it seems, and understanding that there may be more bites at the apple in the future. We'll keep trying, but this is certainly not pleased with where we're at. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Who would like to speak next? And just as a reminder, if you're on the phone, you hit *6 to unmute.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep. Go ahead and start. Please, please share your name for the record.
My name is Michael Patterson. I'm a Anchorage resident. I live in District 1, and I'm gonna try to maintain my composure because I have literally been fuming this entire meeting. I was sort of when Assembly Member Perez-Verdia, when you said, "Oh, the public's gonna have more time to have influence on input," and then when Chief Curl said, "Nope, first week of March, I'm done with the policy, and then we're going to head down the road onto arbitration." So essentially what I've gotten from this meeting is that the public cannot get access to the Department of Law's legal analysis in terms of how it came to the conclusion that an automatic release of footage that involves death or serious bodily injury somehow violates the privacy clause in the Alaska Constitution, which I have to say, I'm a legal studies student, and I think that is such an incredibly cynical interpretation of what that law is supposed to do. That law is supposed to protect the privacy of Alaskans. And to me, the idea that somehow being killed by police in an extrajudicial killing somehow is less than the privacy, I don't understand. And I think the municipality's filing in trying to stop the attorney for Bashar Hassan's family and saying that, oh, we we wouldn't have released this footage anyway, and if we did, it'd be so heavily redacted that people can't see anything. I think is the only transparent thing that the city has been like forthcoming with in terms of like how they're going to treat requests for footage. And also, you know, to the fullest extent of the law, there are so many exemptions in the municipal code when it comes to freedom of information requests for footage that it's laughable. It's honestly laughable. And so essentially this meeting has basically told the public, this is it in terms of how APD Chief Kroll is going to handle this, is that this meeting's it, you don't get to say anymore, and once it goes into arbitration, it's static, and then that's it. So I'm confused when you say, Assemblymember Perez-Verdia, that the public can have more input on this, but then the chief of police is saying, well, first week of March, I'm done. And so, and I'm telling you, like after that footage of Bashar Hassan being killed by police, the community is not happy. And if you continue along this path of how you're doing this with this process right now, this is not going to be seen as a legitimate process. It's not democratic, and frankly, it's very condescending to the public. There is no way when we voted for these body cameras that we were like, well, you know, maybe you know, like our privacy issues. I don't see an issue with if the police kill somebody, the public has a right. We have a compelling interest as the community to know what happened. And the city is taking this very cynical approach to the law, and frankly, it's pissing me off. It makes a mockery of the law. It makes a mockery of the Constitution. And so I'm saying to you all that it is unacceptable that the first week of March, is it.
Thank you so much for your testimony. All right, who would like to go next?
Can somebody just jump in?
Yep, you just jump right in and state your name for the record, and I'll start your time for 3 minutes.
My name's Bruce
Okay.
Farnsworth. I want to focus on two different aspects of the body-worn camera thing. And I'm not a lawyer or a subject matter expert on the technicalities of data management. What I am is a 45-year resident of Anchorage and a longtime advocate of citizen control of our public institutions. First aspect of this issue that I want to emphasize is it was the community that organized the advocacy in favor of the bond proposition that was passed in April of 2021. We, the voters, willingly campaigned and voted to tax ourselves an additional $5.35 or so per $100,000 worth of assessed value for the purchase of these cameras, as well as the hardware and software to capture, store, and manage the data that would result from every officer in APD having a video and audio recording device on their persons in perpetuity. And I know that contradicts the chief's stated position that that's not going to be the case. He's not going to buy that many cameras, but we'll just have to see. Because I think the voters intended exactly that outcome. So as a result of this process that led us here, we have a really strong sense of ownership over this particular program and the policies that govern it. We want it to get done, and we want to have a strong hand in shaping these policies. And no, today's meeting is not and cannot be the last time that we have an opportunity to weigh in on this, because as others have said, the methodology that has governed the way that we've had access to this process up until now has been shoddy at best and really intentionally unengaging, I think, at worst. So why did we do this? Why did we intentionally initiate a tax upon ourselves for the purpose when the police department already has an enormous budget that could have been shuffled around to undertake this program? We did it because the community needed to have that kind of skin in the game. We needed to be able to leverage our interest and our willingness to tax ourselves in order to effectively and meaningfully shape the process. And that's what we're trying to do here. And it sounds like we're being told that the municipality isn't particularly interested in our having. They're willing to talk to the union for up to, you said, I believe, Chief Girl, a year or more, but not us. Well, that's not really I don't think gonna cut it. Second aspect of the discussion I want to emphasize is that all of the recent signals that we keep hearing indicate to us that the police department leadership doesn't share our sense of purpose regarding the body-worn cameras. So I guess my message to you is we read the draft policy that has been released as evidence that our values that have us focused on transparency and accountability are not shared by you. And now just guess I'll have to leave it at that, but I'll send in my written comments.
Thank you very much, and would appreciate your written comments. Okay, who would like to speak next?
So I can Hello, can the members hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Niall Sherwood Williams here.
Go ahead.
I'm testifying today on behalf of accountability and transparency in the Anchorage Police Department. Current Police Chief Michael Curl. I've been asking myself the question, why did Chief McCoy step aside? Well, let me speak to this. Bashir Hassan, they didn't want that dash cam released with Chief McCoy at the helm. So they said, step aside, take the role at Providence Hospital as equity officer, let Michael Curl take the hit, the former administrator of all the records, the former chief cover-up officer. It's an absolute disgrace. There needs to be a policy of absolute release and any use of excessive force. Anytime an officer uses handcuffs, anytime there's an arrest, it needs to be revealed in production of discovery to defendants in a readily accessible fashion. I myself am currently waiting on 9 records requests from Anchorage Police Department, some of which date back to December of 2020. I have been thwarted by multiple people in filing complaints against the department. No man can be his own judge and jury. Internal affairs being the sole investigative body over Anchorage Police Department is unacceptable. The camera is an unbiased witness and it doesn't lie. So audio and visual needs to be on every officer. And anytime there's a use of force or an arrest, it needs to be released within 24 hours. Another thing, protections against Fourth Amendment violations of the U.S. Constitution, unreasonable search and seizure, also our right to privacy under Article 1, Section 22 of the Alaska State Constitution. You cannot use biometric or other categorical surveillance and systemic surveillance over the masses, of the public, to be able to identify individuals without just cause or warrant. This violates our constitutional rights. And speaking to the member of the assembly that I am running against in District 3, Member Perez Verdilla, at this time, your shame is on full display, sir. You balked the opportunity to engage the public as chair of this committee. This complete failure of having no policy right now is an absolute disgrace. APD stole $1.8 million on bond from the people. You are not following our process, and you best believe that we, the people, will make the process, Chief Curl, and Fraternal Order of Police. ACLU Alaska, it is time that suit is filed to enjoin them to follow the order of the bond, please.
All right, thanks so much for your testimony. Who would like to speak next?
I would.
Okay, go ahead and share your name for the record, and I'll start your time. Are you there? We can't hear you.
Hello? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you now.
All
Go
right.
ahead and state your name for the record, and I'll start your time.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Celeste Hodge Grouden, President and CEO of the Alaska Black Caucus. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. As many know, the Alaska Black Caucus has been involved in advocating for body cams from the onset. Recently, and we've heard mention of this several times already, but the recently publicized video of the Bashar Hassan murder from 2019 is a direct example of why we can't afford not to put these cameras on the streets immediately. The fact this occurred in 2019 on the streets of Anchorage, and we're just learning about this travesty and seeing the footing is alarming. I'm voicing my concerns about what I just heard, this meeting, the comments from the chief and legal. I'm actually blown away. Did I hear the chief say that the approved body cam funding is going to be used for something other than body cams, and that additional staff is needed prior to implementing the cameras? Honestly, the community is tired of talking. I'm tired of meeting. I am tired of listening to this nonsense, this bull, and providing feedback when there's no action. I'm sorry to hear from the chief that he believes the policy is a good one, when outside of the police department, minority groups and others that are impacted at a much larger degree have shared over and over that this policy lacks transparency and accountability. To allow officers an opportunity to preview videos before submitting their reports is unreal. To hear the discussion surrounding impractical and impossible, meaning recording or not recording, is at the discretion of the officer. That right there brings about additional concerns of transparency and accountability. Bottom line, the cameras need to be operating at all times. That's what transparency and accountability means. How many times do we need to say it? There's a trust issue. And the purpose of these body cams is to bring about accountability and trust. Also, how many meetings are you wanting to have with the community? I ask the question because our concerns aren't going to change. Again, I'm really disturbed about what I just heard and really honestly in disbelief. Thank you for bringing up the law question, Commissioner, which the response also lacked transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We have a few minutes left. I don't want to run out of time. Is there someone else who would like to speak? Go ahead and unmute and state your name for the record.
Hi, yes, I'd like to make a comment, please.
Okay, go ahead, state your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Emily Clock, and I live in District 3. I want to first of all point out that no one today has publicly testified about their concerns over privacy. I have not seen all the comments that have been submitted to APD, but it seems that's not a concern being expressed here. And so it seems very strange to me that this is such a focus when the public has voted and continues to speak at these limited opportunities to say that our concerns are about footage that will not be released or will not be released in a timely fashion. Particularly, as Celeste just mentioned, the footage of Bashar Hassan's killing shows exactly why this lack or unclarity on release of footage is a problem. We need accountability and trust. I also want to second Commissioner Appick. APD should not be embarrassed about the process taking time to some extent, because it sounds like we are still not where we need to be. At the same time, now there are 2 weeks to weigh in before this goes to the union and is finalized. I have a huge concern over that. I know there's been change over at APD, but continuously we've said the lack of transparency on this process makes it very difficult for us to give input. Moira also made a good point that this process today further proves that input has not been accessible. This is not an accessible format for our community. We need dialogue opportunities where we can ask questions directly. I appreciate that Chief McCoy last summer provided that, but that was only once, and we have never had an opportunity like this to actually engage and ask questions directly in the same format. Former Police Chief McCoy stated in a conversation with the Alaska Black Caucus last week that he believes the public should have some level of access to these videos. And he said, quote, "I think that's a conversation that we need to keep pushing and that we need to have," end quote. So he knew the concerns that the city has and still feels that it's necessary for us to continue to push forward with this as a community. So I request that this will be not the last opportunity to have dialogue and make changes on this policy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And we are just about out of time. I will state a couple of things. There were some people in the queue. Is there a member of the committee who'd like to motion for a extension?
I move to extend by 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I want to make sure that we I just want to state one thing before I go to the two people who want to be in the queue. I will tell you that from my perspective, and I believe this is true of other members of the Assembly, this is not the last opportunity to have a conversation about this, and this is not the best format to have community input. I absolutely agree with that, and I am committed to work with members of this community and community organizations that are here to ensure that we have the spaces and the time to be able to get that input done. So I am committed to do that. So I'm going to give Mr. Dunbar and then Ms. Christensen an opportunity to share final comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Ms. Christensen probably will have the opportunity to speak to a lot. As I see Mr. Chief Curls in the queue, which I really appreciate.
Sure.
I want to start just by saying that I absolutely disagree with what Mr. Niall Williams said, impugning the character of our chief and anyone in the police leadership. That was totally inappropriate and categorically false. I've been doing a lot of door knocking in my district, and I find that generally the police, the APD, has a very high reputation and has done a really good job of building trust with the community. And I hope that the body cam policy and the way body cams are used will continue to build that trust. And I'll say, with regard to the public records request, when I asked that question about if that was going to be the only way that this footage could get out, I think it's if we reframe a little bit, and of course, Ms. Christensen might explain that it's impossible, but I hope that it isn't, that there could be some, let's not call it automatic release, but some more release that comes more unilaterally or comes without a public records request, because we think it does build trust with the community. And maybe there will have to be redactions, but hopefully we can get to a point where, again, this is just building that trust. And I really appreciate the work that Deputy Chief Case has done on this. And I hope that we continue to move forward and build that trust, because clearly we've heard today that there are real concerns. And then on the other hand, again, when I go door to door, I feel like we have a police department that is really well respected in the community, and I hope that this is another bridge that we can use. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Christensen, would you like to share some closing comments?
Thank you, Assemblymember Perez-Rudea. I did want to say I agree with Assemblymember Dunbar.
To refrain from naming members of the public. This shouldn't be attacking members of the public during.
Niall, this is not the time for you to speak. We're done with public testimony. I would appreciate it if you didn't do that. Thank you.
That I agree with. I'm sorry, Assemblymember Dunbar, that we might be arguing over nomenclature or terminology, but there might be further conversations that can occur about release of incidents as they happen, without specific requests or however that might work. And I understand all the concerns that were raised today, but on the flip side, the legal department and APD does have to look at the rights of criminal defendants in criminal cases, the rights of victims, the rights of juveniles, the privacy rights of citizens, and all those things. And all we're saying to you is that we can't make broad statements about what's releasable and what's not. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and that we intend to do that. I also think Assemblymember Dunbar was correct when he said that redacting might allow for additional footage to be shared. And I don't know if it's helpful to people. The attorney that handled the motion, that I believe Assemblymember Rivera and other people have references on, is on this call today and can provide an explanation if that would be helpful. Otherwise, I don't have any further comments.
Thanks. And then I'd like to give Chief Curl an opportunity to share any closing comments.
Okay, thank you, Kim. First, I want to just clarify my comment when I'm embarrassed that we didn't meet our timeline. I'm not embarrassed that the timeline has taken so long. When we gave a timeline that it would be done by the end of 2021, I'm embarrassed that we came forward and said that. With that said, I've heard here from the public that many people want to continue the dialogue. I've heard from members of the public that they've heard the same thing over and over again. We've had 2 listening sessions. We've had over 5 other opportunities for the public to weigh in. We have not received any comment since November 6th on our website for the policy. We want body cameras. We want to get it moving forward. This is why I say we can have more comment if people want. I can postpone my final policy from March. I can. How long are we going to push this down the road? It's still going to take a long time. I want to hear from the public. You know where my email address is. You can email me and give me a recommendation. Give me what you think is a better public forum that we can listen to your concerns and address them. But let's get it done. Let's take this process and move forward so that we can have body cameras on the street, because there's still a long way to go. So I'm just trying to move it forward. There might be issues with the policy you don't like, but again, it's based off legal input and on operational needs. So I am open to more community input, but I would also like to get this pushed down the road. If somebody has a better idea of how we can solicit more information from the public, I'm open to that.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. I appreciate both the intention to try to get this moving forward and get the body cameras on the street, and the openness to say there's still more conversation to be had, and there's still a lot of concern to be heard. And as I said before, I'm willing to be a part of that as well, and to make sure that there are plenty of opportunities for the community to weigh in. So with that being said, I want to apologize to members of the public who maybe didn't get a chance to speak. Again, we will plan another meeting where there will be opportunities for the community to come forward and share thoughts around this. More to come on that in terms of times and dates. With that, I am going to adjourn this meeting.
Mr. Chairman, there's
Yeah?
there's a member of the Public Safety Commission that would like to make a comment.
Oh, thank you. So I didn't see that. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. I'll be quick.
Sure.
And thank you, Assembly Member Dunbar. I do want to make clear that the public should have every opportunity to be afforded the ability to express comments on public policy. However, the public doesn't write APD policy. So there's a distinction between having the ability to make positions known, which is vitally important to the public process. But if there is disagreement on the policy, sometimes that can be a challenge to deal with. So I think that's something we should remember as we move forward in this process. Thank you.
Thanks. And I wanted to say, do I see another commissioner's hand up? Commissioner Edenshaw, is that your hand up?
Yes, hi. I'll make this really quick regarding your comment around further engagement opportunities and speaking opportunities where the public can provide their input. I'm just going to really make a strong recommendation that we need to make sure that we are clear with our communication, that it's easy for the public to be able to testify and to provide comment. I've heard time and time again, there's been so much misinformation, and just the struggle has been so real when it comes to even knowing where the meetings are, where the links are. And so I just really want to make sure that you're all on the same page. We want to make sure this information gets out as soon as possible, so we can make sure people have enough time to come and to participate and to provide their input. And so if that's reflected in the minutes, please just know that I've heard so much feedback around the process and being able to attend these meetings.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. And just a reiteration that all the documents from this meeting are on the Public Safety Committee website, and I appreciate that this is not the best format and not the best way for the public to participate. Okay, I don't see any other members of commission or the assembly in the queue. I really want to again thank our presenters and thank the public for being here today. And with that, I'm going to adjourn.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Assembly Member Perez Verdilla. This is Patrick Burke from the Department of Law. Before we break, I do want to mention, you know, I came in with the new administration 7 or 8 months ago, so this process had long been underway before I joined Department of Law. And I want to note how much I appreciate, Assembly Member Perez Verdilla, your willingness to come in and work with me and meet with me and get me caught up on where we are. So just know that I certainly appreciate your time, and I want others to know how serious you've taken this and how much you have put into understanding, you know, where the Department of Law is coming from in its analysis. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm hesitating to say adjourn because one more person will want to speak. But no, I appreciate everybody. More to come. So thank you very, very much for your time today, and have a good weekend and be safe. This meeting is now adjourned.